So I'm delighted to introduce our next team, Team 5, who will be talking about mobility and accessibility. And their U of M advisor was Dr. Jonathan Levine. And their project contact was Jonna Lake, who is the president of 3R Sustainability. Take it away.
Thank you. So our group looked at accessibility in the Strip District, and I'm going to go over context. So the Strip is the neighborhood situated close to downtown Pittsburgh. What makes the Strip, one of the things that makes it unique is that it has a flat terrain, whereas the rest of the city is very hilly overall. And since 2015, the Strip has doubled in its residential population. And we chose to focus on accessibility as opposed to mobility to move away from metrics that limit to speed and vehicle miles to accessibility metrics, which include bikeability and walkability. We worked with our client 3R to identify ways to improve the Strip District. And then some areas we looked at were parking pricing, local business resilience, areas for pedestrian and bikeability improvements, and overall accessibility. Now I'll pass it on to Kylan.
Great, so I'll be speaking a little bit about our methods for throughout the year-long project. So we started last January, which feels like a very long time ago now, doing research on the Strip District. So there's a wealth of resources available, and 3R was a fantastic resource in providing that information for us. We had interviews, and we spoke with 3R extensively during this time period. And then in May, we visited the Strip District. So we put our feet on the pavement, learned a lot more about the Strip by interacting with stakeholders, locals that had strong opinions about how to change accessibility in the Strip and different mobility options. After our visit, we did a case study analysis of other industrial Midwestern cities that had transitioned their mobility systems and what lessons could be gleaned for the Strip if they wanted to make a similar transition. Going forward into October, we employed a design thinking method, which Hannah will speak more about shortly, which really tries to go after the missing voices by interviewing stakeholders in the Strip, voices we didn't hear in our first set of interviews. And then in December, we provided recommendations for how accessibility could be improved in the Strip. And here's just a fun set of photos from our visit in May. We walked the streets of the Strip. We went through the riverfront area and spent a lot of time studying parking in the Strip and a lot of the new mobility initiatives like the bike share program you see in the bottom. Great, so handing things over to Hannah.
Yeah, so as Kylan mentioned during the stakeholder interviews, one of the biggest learnings that we had was that a lot of different stakeholders have very strong opinions about what Strip District patrons need in order to improve their mobility experiences, but we recognized a gap where we weren't hearing from the community themselves. And so that is what actually led us to rework our project plan and incorporate this design thinking component, which is what we've been working on for the past 3 months. And just a quick definition, design thinking is a problem-solving methodology that centers end users, or in this case, Strip District patrons, so that we can really help decision makers figure out what to prioritize by bringing the voices of the community members more to center. So this is a little snapshot of our process. So what we did was we interviewed with the help of 3R, which really helped us with our recruiting to get access to these perspectives. We interviewed a mix of residents, employees, and visitors, recognizing that we needed to make sure that we were talking to people with different types of mobility or accessibility goals in the Strip District. And so just to highlight one of the activities that we did in our interviews, we call it a mobility or accessibility journey mapping, where we essentially talked to the interviewees about the different, tell us about it the last time that you were in the Strip District and kind of what were the ways that you got around, what were the good experiences, bad experiences, and that helped us recognize what some of the common pain points were. And then over on the right, you can see this is our synthesis board where we started to cluster and organize what the different responses were and key quotes we were hearing from different from different interviewees by category, which ultimately led us to kind of draw out some key insights that fed into our recommendations. So just to go over, we ended up delivering 8 insights, which we already presented to 3R, but just to highlight some of the biggest ones in this short time that we have. One of the biggest things that we saw was that there are very strong negative perceptions of regarding public transportation options in Pittsburgh generally, and in the Strip District, it doesn't occur to people to look up public transportation options, which is underserviced. And this is particularly important because we were hearing from a lot of folks in the interviews that last mile options are insufficient. We also heard from some interviewees that parking is a huge pain point in terms of the sort of experience that they have. So interestingly, there's not a supply problem of parking in the Strip District. It's actually more a historical holdover of a baseline expectation that is unrealistic in terms of residents expecting, or not just residents, but patrons expecting to have free, cheap, and convenient parking. And so this was a very interesting insight for our team to think about. And then the last insight was regarding essentially safety in terms of a problem. We identified a problem of aggressive driving in the Strip District, and in particular identified 2 intersections that all across the board interviewees deemed as particularly unsafe and needing interventions. I'm going to pass it over to Julia to talk about the case studies.
So combining the context that we gained from our visit to the Strip back in May with the new insights that we gathered from this design thinking work, we wanted to provide 3R with three examples of cities that were similar in terms of size and in terms of accessibility issues that they were facing, and also in terms of history. So cities that might have been impacted by deindustrialization and other cultural things. And examples of how they approach their accessibility issues and the successes and failures of those. So the first one that we looked at was Detroit's riverfront revitalization. We looked at different funding mechanisms, and the second one we looked at was a quantitative analysis of economic outcomes compared to biker access and pedestrian access in Minneapolis. And the third case study that we looked at was Baltimore's Charm City Circulator. So this was also founded upon the issue of congestion and lack of easy, accessible parking in the city's downtown. And we wanted to compare this for a potential solution for the Strip as well. And so I'll pass it to Kat to talk about some recommendations.
So for our recommendations, we broke them down into 3 different themes, which you might have already figured out. For the circulator, we recommended a feasibility study that would be followed up by hopefully a pilot project. We also recommend, because of the feelings about public transit, to have a very different brand, even if it is a part of the public transit system in Pittsburgh. For pedestrian and cyclists, we recommend improving their infrastructure by adding crosswalks where they don't have any, and also adding things like bump outs, which reduces the amount of space that pedestrians actually have to cross the street, as well as potentially looking into things like slow streets, which would limit the number of cars that can go down the street, except a local delivery, which allows pedestrians to spill out into the street and actually explore the Strip District in that way. And we also recommend connecting the riverfront trail with the community and trying to tie that in more. And for our third section, cars, we recommend dealing with their pricing problems by looking at dynamic pricing, or also doing away with their perversive pricing that encourages people to fight for the closest spots while there's ample parking in the back. Also, a lot of the pedestrian and cycling infrastructure also makes drivers drive more safely in the Strip because they're not the ones who are the dominant and the most important people there anymore. So we'd like to acknowledge, first off, the Dow Foundation and the Graham Institute, as well as our client, 3R Sustainability, the Strip District neighbors, and our advisor, Jonathan Levine, and also all of our interviewees that we got to talk to over the last year. Thank you so much, and this is our team, and we are open for questions.
Thank you. Yeah, so my question is related to your insight about, parking and perceptions of parking and just that, a lot of it's related to how things change over time. So is there like a solution to that, or is it kind of just like in terms of the public perception and public happiness, is it kind of just waiting for like the mindset to shift?
So from what we've seen in other cities, especially in other countries like in Europe that have like moved away from such car-centric mindsets, is to like the more inconvenient you make experiences for drivers, the more likely they're to turn away. And yes, they might be a little bit more grumpy, but if you you go to the Strip not to drive through the Strip, you go to walk through the Strip and to go to the stores and to experience it. And driving tends to just send you past it, or you just puts you in a bad mood. So I think as you let people experience that, I guess being able to do that, they'll move away from it. And also, if they can't park there in general, then they'll probably have to see the benefit eventually. So, yeah.
I'm curious about the target population. I don't know the target group that the program design is trying to cater to. Because I lived in Pittsburgh for a bit, and I know for student there's like multiple large school universities that are Carnegie Mellon, Pitt, and I know for Carnegie Mellon the bus system is free for them through their tuition. So is your program design taking account like the student population, or is it, and within Pittsburgh is one of the largest cities in that area, but there's also a lot of smaller townships that are surrounding. So is their the target group expanding to those different populations, or is there a specific community in Pittsburgh, within Pittsburgh boundaries?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think with our segmentation, the populations we were targeting and really prioritizing were those three categories. So Strip District residents, visitors to the Strip, which can include students, it's a pretty broad category, and employees as sort of like the three main there's clearly more different profiles of people that are visiting the Strip District, but those are kind of the ones we prioritize since they make up the majority of Strip District patrons at any given moment. We did have a diversity of perspectives of like recent graduates who told us about, oh, I used to use the bus when it was free, like that. So we did incorporate, we tried to make sure that our distribution of people that we talked to, we had one retiree and then we had one recent grad. So we were really trying to get as much diversity as we could given our constraints of recruiting. A great question.
One right here. Who is it?
I just happened to be in the Strip District this summer, and one of the things that Strip District that struck me was that there is really no tree canopy to speak of, and particularly on a hot summer day, that made it somewhat unpleasant to walk around for a long period of time. As I understand, tree canopy can also slow drivers down. I'm wondering if your team looked at all at the possibility of trying to affect that, at least in the long term.
We did not directly look into that. We did also we talked about slow streets, but another one of the recommendations that we had was complete streets, which actually does encourage putting using urban forestry to slow down to slow down drivers. So yeah, and I think that's actually an initiative that the city of Pittsburgh has taken on and actually put into play, is that streets have to be complete streets.
I'm curious if you got any pushback on trying to deprioritize cars, and if you did, who did you get pushback from?
Yeah, so I think one of the key insights that we had, or one of the key quotes from when we were doing our design thinking process, was like, Pittsburgh is a car city, and kind of the historical sort of like importance of cars in Pittsburgh. But there was a lot of openness to, and like Kat was saying, when people go to the Strip District, they're going because they want to walk around. So this is actually quite a shift from how it used to be. I don't think we had time to get into it, but the strip district's history is that it used to sort of supply a lot of the produce for different restaurants and kind of like large-scale wholesaler type of business models, and now it's becoming a very trendy place to actually like park and then stay in the strip district. So I think at least I don't see any car centrality shifting in the broader Pittsburgh area, but at least in the strip district, there's a little bit of a shift in narrative with the changes. But certainly we do hear some resistance there.